Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby Price, and today we're here to give our 2024 season driver grades. Joining me today, we have Grid Talk's very own Louis Edwards,
Hello.
and we've also got Jawad Yacoub.
Hello.
Hello, and before we get into the episode, we must thank our sponsor for this episode, Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC. Well, head to Bet Online today and don't forget to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, the game starts here. And if you're feeling extra generous, please consider supporting us on Patreon for exclusive access and behind the scenes content, including Beyond the Grid Talk, our Patreon exclusive podcast. So, who has been showing their working, who was skiving to play video games, and then showing up, and most importantly, who is finishing top of the class out of the 2024 F1 graduates. It's time to assign the official Grid Talk driver grades, and we're going to go from that high, starting down to the lows with the Fs. Logan Sargent, Jawad, his best result was a P11 in Silverstone. He was dropped after the Dutch Grand Prix. A catastrophic failure of a season for Logan Sargent, with seemingly no roots back into F1 for the American. How will his legacy be?
Sorry. Yeah, his legacy. Good question. I think it'll probably be remembered for the enormous crash bill that he tallied in his time at Williams, which sadly, many were surprised that he came into this season still as a Williams driver. There was some who were like, oh, let's keep the faith and see how it goes and everything. And yeah, I guess that patience and that faith ran out when they dumped him in between, not even in the middle of the season. It was after the mid-season break where we came back. They had a race in Belgium and he had that big, sorry, not Belgium, Netherlands. I haven't done my homework. Yeah, so at Zandvoort, he had that massive shunt and wrote the car off for qualifying. A testament to the Williams mechanics for getting it all repaired. I think that's been their legacy this season, is how many repair jobs that they've had to do. And it hasn't all been for Logan either, which, I don't know if there's some sort of pride that Logan can take away in that. But, it wasn't working, particularly when you've got Alex Albon in the other car showing that they're capable of scoring points. Yes, Williams did go in a different development direction this year. A lot of things that they had to change back of house, which meant that rather than having a peaky car at select tracks, they were trying to develop more of an all-rounder, which did make scoring points a lot more difficult. But in that situation, it would have been kind of key for Logan to be a lot closer to Alex, or at least show that, he wasn't going to qualify last in every race, or make up the back row of the grid. So this is why I guess he gets to fail, because he didn't even get to see out the end of the season. I do have a moment where I think a lot of us felt sorry for him back in the Australian Grand Prix, where it was Alex who wrote off his car in practice and then Logan had to give up his chassis for him for the rest of the weekend. Not that they maximize the opportunity anyway, but still it was like, how lowly did they think of their driver if this is what's happened. So yeah, I guess the writing was on the wall for him, and it's pretty obvious why he ended up with a fail at the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good reference as well, that Australian Grand Prix very much painting the picture of Williams this season, where they were always going to prioritise Alex Albon, and he was the smarter choice for points. Obviously, he finished P11 in that race, but yeah, I think the writing was on the wall at that point. If any driver was being dropped, it was always going to be Logan Sargent, and that's what happened. And another driver who didn't make it to the end of the season, resulting in another F. Louis, it's Daniel Ricciardo. He had a best result of P8 in Canada before being dropped after the Singapore Grand Prix, which was probably one of Red Bull's least PR-friendly weekends of the season. There were a few of them, actually. But yeah, didn't make it to the end of the season. You can see why we're giving him an F.
Yeah, I think in terms of how grid talk driver ratings usually go, if you don't make it to the end of the season, it's an automatic fail. I mean, it's very clear from Ricardo's season that it was generally quite poor in terms of results, only scoring points on four occasions. But that did, obviously, his points are 12, but that was definitely boosted by that Miami sprint race, where he not only qualified really high at the grid, he did manage to finish P4, which I think is his only real crowning achievement, I would say, of the season. It was, yeah, pretty poor season. Unfortunately, it kind of, I think it marked the end of Ricardo's career. And given, how much he's achieved in Formula One, it was a really sad way to see him go. There's a lot of talk whether, he'll be back maybe with GM Cadillac. Is that going to be a possibility? But I personally think it would be in GM Cadillac's best interest to move away from a driver like Daniel Ricciardo. Yes, he's good PR, but unfortunately, I just don't think he has what it takes anymore. And I think he got found out pretty quickly this year. Yuki was kind of dragging that team along while Ricciardo was kind of sort of always nearer the back, which is a shame because as someone who I do really like Daniel, and it was a real shame that his season ended the way it was, and like you said, the real poor way it was handled by Red Bull is honestly quite shameful for Red Bull. The way that they handled it, it was very poor, and I think he definitely deserved to go out with a bit more dignity, even though his season wasn't the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I almost feel there was an element of being set up to fail with the narrative of he's being brought in to, replace Sergio Perez if he can perform in a car significantly not at the level that Sergio Perez's car was performing. So, yeah, just not the final farewell for the Honey Badger that, anybody would have wanted, and certainly not himself. But that's our F grades, and moving up so far, just, the value of having an E as opposed to an F. But let's do it. Jawad, Lance Stroll is our first of our E drivers. 13th in the championship, 24 points, best result of a P6 in Australia in the Grand Prix. But no points finishes in the second half of the season. Was it just that he wasn't able to compete with his Aston Martin? But also kind of like, the incidents like the formation lap in Brazil, is it a surprise he got an E?
Not really, because he always tends to score in the bottom half of the field when it comes to these sort of things. And, I think it's just his general presence and being in F1 that seems to cause trouble for a lot of people. And, I've said it many times on this show that, it's not that, I'm purposely going after him or anything. I genuinely want to see him do well if he has the ability, or the ability that's been talked up for years, that he is fast, he's achieved this, etc. But what season are we up to for Lance Stroll? This has to be up there like seventh or eighth season for him in the sport. It's been a while, and yeah, the difference between him and his teammate at the moment, yeah, sure, it's a two-time world champion, but he is getting on age-wise in his 40s now, Fernando Alonso. So you'd expect, for even Alonso talking up Stroll, saying, oh, he's one of the best teammates I've ever had, along those lines. He'd be a bit better. So yeah, you highlighted Brazil, that sort of WTF moment on the outlap. Wrecking before they even got to the grid. And, as we saw in that race, anything could have happened. We had both Alpines on the podium. So imagine Aston Martin kind of licking their lips before the race, thinking, anything could happen. We could get a result here. And to be denied that opportunity before the race even started. Actually, he shunted in qualifying as well earlier. So Aston had to rebuild that car when they did the quali before the race on Sunday. Only for him to not even make it to the grid after their effort. So that's a bit of a kick to the team and the mechanics for getting the job done. But I wanted to highlight too, going back to Barcelona and FP3, where it raised a bit of a moment when he kind of just rammed into the side of Lewis Hamilton during practice, because he wanted to get back at him for being in his way or something. It's like, mate, where's the awareness? And this is something that we've discussed on many shows before. I remember last year, what was it, Austin last year, where down the straight he kind of just dozed off and collected Alonso while he was at it. Or maybe a couple of years ago. I don't know if it was when Alonso was still at Alpine, but yeah, he just lacks awareness sometimes. And it's just like, you look at the strength of the grid at the moment and the drivers we're going to get in next year, such talent and new drivers out of F2 and whatnot. And you look at Stroll still occupying that seat. It's a seat that should be occupied by someone better. So, like I'd love for him to have the chance and everything, but his results, like you've said, don't really warrant that. And yeah, not scoring points in the second half of the season in a car that, yeah, comfortably should still be in that, fifth, sixth fastest car, hasn't done the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, more of Lance Stroll just doing Lance Stroll things of just coasting through a season, turning when he wants, braking when he wants. I think on his Christmas list needs to be a pair of mirrors that he can actually use. But let's move on. Without any context, an E for a driver in P8 with 4 podiums, 152 points sounds incredibly harsh. Louis, but Checo Perez's 2024 season was anything but comfortable. He never looked good in the car, and with mistakes in quali plaguing his narrative, he just was always chasing the pack on a Sunday.
Yeah, I saw a stat online, and it kind of went along the lines of, if I can't remember the exact stat, but I think the stat was, if Max Verstappen had stopped racing after Miami. So Miami was what, the sixth race of this season, sixth or seventh race this season. So either Miami or Imola, one of those two races. If Max had stopped racing, Checo still would not have outscored Max this season. And this was a season that had 24 races, and it only took Max 7 races to be able to score more than the 152 points that Checo scored this season. And honestly, the writing has been on the wall for Checo all year. It was a shock to most people that he was still on the grid this year, given that even though he finished P2 in the championship last year, was almost like double the amount of points behind Max. His career at Red Bull was definitely teetering, and he had to show this year. And honestly, when Max Verstappen wins the World Championship, yet Red Bull finish third in the Constructors' Championship, which is something we very, very rarely see in Formula One these days. It has been years and years and years since a team not only hasn't finished P2, but finished P3 in the Constructors. And that's purely down to Checo. And there's no one else you can blame. Max has been as solid as you can be, as we'll touch on later. But the fact that the likes of McLaren, the likes of Ferrari have been able to constantly outscore Red Bull, especially after the first kind of 10 races of the season, was all down to Checo. And that is a lot of money lost to Red Bull. Red Bull are this big energy drink conglomerate, but it still costs a lot of money to race in Formula One. And I imagine they still rely heavily on the prize money that comes in. And to be losing millions and millions of pounds because of one driver who's not been able to keep up in the Constructors' Championship. And not only that, Checo, I don't know how many people often look at this, but there is such thing called the 24 Destructors' Championship, which looks at the amount of money that a driver will cost a team. And Checo has won the Destructors' Championship. He's cost Red Bull in damages alone this season in the ballpark of $4.8 million in damages, just beating up Alex Albon and Colapinto and the rest of the Williams team. But it's been a damning season for Checo. So many points during the season. We were like, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone. There's rumors circulating nearly every other weekend, like, Checo's gone, Checo's gone, Checo's gone. And the fact he made it to the end of the season, I mean, that is probably testament. They had to probably get to, at least to the Mexican Grand Prix. They needed those merch sales to come in, and they needed that extra income just to make up for all the money he's been costing them. But it's no surprise that Red Bull decided to get rid of him. It's no surprise he's got such a low grade. And I think possibly we will not see Perez in Formula One ever again.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see him again after, the when Sergio Perez joined Red Bull, he'd won a race in a racing point, a car undeserving of wins and things like that. The legacy that he would have left behind had he, moved on in 2020, I think would have been solid enough that like he could be a Nico Hulkenberg and keep coming back every now and then, the same way we got Nico Hulkenberg. But I think 2023, 2024, no one is re-signing that Sergio Perez, and I think that's the shame ultimately. He was a driver that we saw such promise in when he was in a team that just wasn't at the front. But as soon as he was in that front running car, yes, he helped Max win his championship in 2021 with some brilliant defending. But again, he was so far back that it put him in that position. But that's just all. He's never going to match Max Verstappen. We know this. But yeah, not the best season for Sergio Perez, and they have now parted ways at the cost of around $16 million, I understand. So even more money for Red Bull to be paying out on behalf of Sergio Perez. But let's move on to the D's, not the dollars because we've just talked about that, but the D grades. And we're going to start off, Jawad, with Esteban Ocon, 14th in the championship, 23 points. That highlight obviously being the best result of P2 in Brazil, but it was a season of inconsistency, silly mistakes, dropped for the final race. It's surprising he didn't get an F just based on our grid talk criteria from that, but, not the final season with Alpine he would have been hoping for.
No, and I think it was quite telling when you look at how the dynamic within the team, particularly since Pierre Gasly joined last year, has very much shifted to his countrymen. And this was Ocon's team for so many years. He came back, he made his comeback to F1 in 2020 with them when they were still Renault. And yeah, he managed to stick it out and he was faithful and everything. And with all the omni shambles that has been Alpine this year, which is a whole nother story, he just made a fool of himself really this year. Like on the numbers, yes, he still beat Gasly 13-10 in the race head-to-heads, and then in qualifying, it was I think one race difference, one quality difference between him and Gasly again in Ocon's favor. But he's been the troublemaker. He proved again that he doesn't like dealing with teammates that are also alphas in that respect. We saw them come together in Monaco, which yeah was pretty much I guess the catalyst to the sacking or not renewing of Ocon's contract moving forward. But I think just overall I'm glad that they got the podium at the end of the year in Brazil to kind of put that relationship, to make sure it ended on a decent note, even though he did end up missing the last race because he wanted to do the test for Haas, and this was the condition upon which he was allowed to do that. So I guess there's no real love lost there. But then again, it's not really the same Alpine team, or it's not really the French team anymore because it's being run by an Italian and they're going to have Mercedes engines in the back of it. So yeah, not much higher up, I guess you could put Ocon based off all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ocon delivered inconsistently, had moments, had press, had all of that stuff, and didn't get to do the final race, which I do think was a bit of a shame for him particularly. But we'll see him again on the grid next season with Haas, and it's just another opportunity for him to rewrite a legacy. But Louis, let's move on to Sauber. So Zhou Guanyu very much saved Sauber from a pointless season in the Qatar Grand Prix, but neither Sauber drivers really shone this season. They've had an underdeveloped car, poor pit stops, no pace. I almost think a D grade for both drivers is generous considering the other grades we've given, but what do you think?
I mean, yeah, I'm generally looking at the spreadsheet now, and like I personally gave Bottas a D, so I can't really complain too much about that one. But I did give Joe an F, which maybe in retrospect was a bit harsh, given that no one else gave him an F. But that was my decision. I didn't think he had a particularly great season. He went pretty much under the radar for the entire year. And obviously, yeah, he got his points in Qatar, but it really doesn't do much. It's, they still finished absolutely dead last in the constructors. I mean, how many points off Williams were they? They were
13.
13 points off Williams. And there's really not a lot you can say about Sauber. As you said, they it was just kind of a bit of just a calamitous season. I'm not sure if they really came into the season with much expectation, but at the end of the day, the drivers can only deal with the machinery that they're given. And for me, I feel as though Bottas generally did a better job. I mean, I look now at the results and they're also like changeable. They all change quite a lot, and so it's hard to really say who was consistently better. But yeah, both drivers not great, and both drivers we're not going to see on the grid next year. And I think a low grade is warranted for that. I mean, Joe's adventure in Formula One for the last few years has been relatively disappointing. I mean, the only memorable thing I can think of it was his bowling in Hungary. When he got an amazing qualifying, but threw it all away by turn one. And Bottas's most memorable thing since going to Sauber is basically his mullet and his mustache. I'll be completely honest. I can't really think of much more off the top of my head that he's done. I mean, I'm glad for Bottas to get a reserved seat at Mercedes. I think he still has a lot to offer for Formula One. Joe, unless the team is going to be really cash strapped, I don't really see much more for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think what we got from Bottas leaving Mercedes was personality, and that's probably about it, really. Which is good to see. Like we want to see drivers expressing themselves, being themselves, and things like that. But just yeah, an absolute mistake, as he said himself. And a driver, Jawad, let's talk about Kevin Magnussen. The first driver to receive a race ban from the penalty point system. His final season was with Haas, and in Formula One, I believe it is going to be. Certainly a controversial one. Being a roadblock to support his teammate in Miami, missing out in Baku due to his race ban. How do you rate his final season at Haas?
I mean, very much, yeah, a D grade for him. He scored points. He did, I guess, all the team player things that were required of him. I don't know if I call it ethical or morally support all that, what happened in Miami in particular. But yeah, he very much went full Viking this year for his last season. And you know what? I'm actually happy for him because he seems happy that, he's going to move on from F1 because, imagine that, you spend pretty much your whole career driving for either a midfield team or a team at the back of the grid. And I love hearing him talk about the fact that he's going to move on. He's going to race for BMW next year in sports cars. And, he wants to win races and get trophies and be on the podium. So, I'm happy for him there because I've been a fan of K-Mag since he made his debut. And, that was 10 years ago that he came in with McLaren, got on the podium in his first race as well. It feels like it never happened, to be honest, when you look at the way the rest of his career has panned out. And yeah, I think the season for him, ban you mentioned, he earned that race ban in Baku, but also it's just been chalk and cheese between him and his teammate. Nico Hulkenberg is on one end of our grading scales, as we'll get to later, but Magnussen's all the way down there. So I think for Haas as well, it's important to go in a different. They've gone in a new direction, obviously this year with a new team principal and everything. But I think part of that also is refreshing the driver lineup. And Magnussen was great for them when they needed a bailout in 2022. He had some great moments. Obviously, the pole position in Sao Paulo was great as well, and they've had some good results, albeit not a podium yet. But, I'm happy that we get to see Magnussen move on and potentially get some trophies in his career and not be remembered as he is in F1 for crashing into people and, saying things like he's not afraid to die, and something else I can't say on the recording that he said to Hulkenberg a few years ago.
Incredible. And yeah, absolutely. As you say, like if we're viewing the C grade as average, that makes Kevin Magnussen below average and Nico Hulkenberg above average, which we'll get to. But let's move on to the C's then, and we're going to start, Louis, with Williams. We've already touched on Logan Sargent, but both Alex Albon and Franco Colapinto racking up quite the repair bill for Williams. They must have done something right to receive a C grade, but tell me about Williams and how their team ultimately kind of had to get so familiar with rebuilding their car that it was kind of like how when you get a Lego set that you're just so familiar with that you don't even need the instructions anymore.
I think the reason why they've got C's is just points. I mean, the Williams hasn't been the greatest car. As Jawad was talking about earlier with Logan Sargent, this was a very different year. James Vowles' principle for this year was I don't care. Just get to the end of the season. Every race is testing. It's not, we're not here to be competitive. We're here to learn and develop, and we are just going to use this as a big data building exercise. And he said, crash the car. He doesn't care. And boy, did they. I mean, Colapinto raced for how many races? Nine? Nine races he did this season. And if we go back to my old trusty Destructors Championship stats, in those nine races, Colapinto did $3.4 million worth of damage to that Williams.
How
Alex
much of that
Albon
was
over the
just
course.
in Brazil?
I don't. I mean, Mexico must have been a fairly hefty bill. Brazil would have definitely been a big bill. Alex Albon did 4.6 million dollars worth of damage. I mean that is crazy. And then Logan Sargent for his sins did 3 million. So it's Colapinto did more damage than Logan Sargent in the nine races that he was there, which is insane. And I think the reason why we give them C points is because they went aggressive, they went hard. There was no point I don't think we've seen with either Alex Albon or Franco Colapinto this season where there hasn't been some sort of a drive to push and go for it and go to the front. I think what we're seeing from other drivers, especially that we've ranked lower, is that they were kind of just like middling around. They weren't really, didn't seem to be that effort, didn't seem to be that sort of drive to push on. And we've seen some great racing this year from the likes of Colapinto. His overtake on Fernando Alonso at Austin got rated as the best overtake of the season. Alex Albon, I think about in Canada making that double overtake on I think it was Esteban Ocon and someone else. The race is very early in the morning for me. I don't really remember. It could be someone else. I don't know. But I think the reason why we have given the C grade is just because there has been some really good performances from them at times. It hasn't always been the great. They have crashed the car a lot, which possibly warrants maybe ducking their points a little bit. But at the end of the day, Colapinto came in very late in the season and he got 2 points finishes within his first three races. I mean, that's incredible.
It absolutely is, and we saw a lot this season, drivers being, airlifted in first race, getting points and things like that, and we'll get to that with some other drivers too. But yeah, as you say, they scored points in what was definitely a tricky car, and they were pushing to the limit, and they were pushing past the limit, and that's why they crashed quite a bit. But Joward, a C grade almost seems harsh for a driver who won two races, had five podiums, 21 points finishes. But it felt like a season of two halves for Lewis Hamilton, where for the second half of the season, you would have thought he'd rather be anywhere else than the cockpit of that Mercedes W15. Is a C grade right for the seven-time world champion?
Yes, but I almost feel like I'm disrespecting the legend and the man by doing it. Look, it's a funny thing, obviously going over to Ferrari, something I never thought would happen. I always saw him for his loyalty with Mercedes throughout his career that he's had since his, early days as well with McLaren. So it is almost a bit of a shock to the system that he's leaving. And I wonder, and there's been a lot of conversation and speculation about that this year, which, I'm not getting into conspiracy theories or anything like that, but what that does to his mentality as well, while to the media and everything, he might say, yeah, I'm still giving it my all and everything. I want to try and unlock whatever is missing in this car. But is there something at the back of your mind that just says, look, change is as good as a holiday? I think, next year it's gonna reinvigorate me. You kind of get so stretched so thin that it just it can't be bothered anymore in a way. Well, not can't be bothered, but just, you don't want to put it on the line like you did all that time before. So, I think there's a lot that I guess he can still walk away and be proud of this season. The two wins, of course, and that Silverstone win, which many of us will probably say it was our highlight of the year as well. The best win of the year was seeing him take that record victory on home soil. But then, yeah, the deficits you look at in qualifying, I think it's the first time that he's been beaten head to head by a teammate in qualifying, or is that far behind to George Russell, and same in the races as well. So yeah, and then you've got that speculation and conspiracy theory about whether the car was not, something was wrong with the car in comparison to his teammate as well. So, lots of stuff just going on in the periphery and, the narrative being written. I think a season like this is only going to make him better for his next season. He's going to be a lot more motivated and everything. I don't think it's fair to, like I said this back in 22 when, we first got the Mercedes Diva car in the ground effect era and kind of wrote him off, then said, oh, he's done now. The scars of 21 may never heal, but, what he's proved in the last few years is that, he's persisted enough. But then also, I think his will and desire to win is that great that he's gonna leave the team he's been loyal to for so long and pursue a passion project. And good on him for that. So it's a C. Like I said, it feels disrespectful almost to give him that, but in this instance, it is quite deserved. But I don't think we'll see him down that low next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is the lowest that Lewis Hamilton has ever finished in the F1 constructors in the drivers' order, outside the top six for the first time since he joined in 2007. But the last of our C grades, then, Louis, we're going to give it to the remaining two V-Carb drivers, Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda. One of these has just been promoted to the senior Red Bull team, and it's not the driver who finished the season with 30 points and three seventh place finishes as his best results. What does Yuki Tsunoda need to do to earn a top drive, if he deserves one at all? And what did Red Bull see from Lawson's six races to give him that seat?
I mean, I'm looking at the season, and honestly, the fact that I'll be honest, I completely disagree that they have both got the same grade. If I look at my own personal grades, I gave Yuki Tsunoda a B, and I gave Liam Lawson a D. To see them both on a C, it's kind of irritating. I mean, there's no disrespect to Liam Lawson. He came in, he got dragged in after Singapore in kind of dubious circumstances, like we kind of spoke about before with the whole deal with Daniel Ricciardo. I'm sure it was a really uncomfortable environment for anyone to have to come in. Daniel was a much beloved driver. The way he was forced out really did not sit well with people. And then you've got to come in and replace him. There's a lot of focus on you. And I think he did well. Like in general, we look at his results. 2 points finishes within his first three races, two ninth places in Austin and then in Sao Paulo. But then after that, there's not really that much else to say. He's 16th, 16th, 14th, 17th. Wasn't fantastic. So to compare him and give him the same grade as Yuki Tsunoda, who has dragged this team through the mud this year. This RB, the V-Carb, has been atrocious. It has been a really bad car, and I don't think people quite understand. Like, Ricardo didn't have a great season, but he was also driving an absolute dog all season. Yuki Tsunoda has also drove an absolute dog all season, and he scored 30 points. That's more than Lance Stroll. He scored more points than Lance Stroll in an Aston Martin, which has been consistently better than the V Cub all year. He went on a great run of scoring points. He got points in Australia, then the next race in his home race in Japan. Then he got 3 point scores in the finish in a row in Miami. That included another sprint race, so that technically 4 points finishes in a row. Then a tenth in Imola, eighth in Monaco. Then he got a couple of points in Silverstone and Hungary, and then he had a few non-points finishes before getting another 2 point finishes in Sao Paulo and in Las Vegas. He outqualified Liam Lawson 6-0. He completely outqualified Daniel Ricciardo. Yet he's got the same grade. This is the thing that's I don't want to sound like the biggest Yuki fanboy here, but I do think giving them both the same grades is really unfair on Yuki. Obviously, when it comes to the Red Bull drive, I knew Yuki would never get there. Helmut Marko would rather do literally anything. He would rather sack Sergio Perez, give him all that money to buy out his contract, and then re-sign him than sign Yuki Tsunoda. I think Helmut Marko has been very clear that he does not want Yuki Tsunoda. I think he sees Yuki Tsunoda as like a bygone thing from Honda. He's like, we kind of just stuck with him for now. And that's why I think he would rather promote literally anyone. If, for example, Lawson doesn't do very well and Red Bull go back to their old tricks of sacking drivers within half a season, I think they would still promote Hadjar over Yuki. I think that would just be their logical choice. I think he would do that. Regardless of how Hadjar performs in the first half of next season, I think he would still do that. For Yuki, he needs to leave. He is in a Pierre Gasly situation. He needs to leave. And I think the logical place for him to go would to follow Honda to Aston Martin. That would be the logical step. I wouldn't be surprised if Honda maybe push Aston Martin and go, hey, we would like a Japanese driver in the team. And I think Yuki would be the best choice for that. However, when you've got a stubborn old man and a Nepo baby in that team, it's going to be very hard.
Yeah, he very much relies on there being a seat available, and I don't think Lance Stroll Sr. is gonna sack his son anytime soon, or the driver that is, fundamentally the reason why the team has had the positive results that they've had over the past 2 seasons. But speaking of positivity, if you're enjoying this podcast, we'd love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're one of the 72% of people who aren't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. And if you're not already, why not follow us on socials at Grid Talk UK, wherever you want to find us. Now let's move on to some B grades. Like this, now we're starting to see the positives, the above averages performances. And we're going to start off, Jawad, with the other Alpine driver of Pierre Gasly. Finished P10 in the championship, 42 points, that best finish of P3 in Brazil. Just outperformed his teammate generally. And where he didn't outperform his teammate, it was generally because his teammate hit him or caused some form of damage. Pierre Gasly, what's he done to deserve the B this season?
I mean, I don't want to say he single-handedly took Alpine from the bottom of the constructors' table to finish sixth. Who would have said that at the start of the year? When you look back at how they started the season with an overweight car, they were being knocked out in Q1, just, seemingly in a development hole that didn't think that no one thought that they'd get out of it. I still think that Alpine is an omni shambles. There is no identity with the team. I'm pretty sure they're going to sell it, even if they say that Flavio Briatore isn't there to sell it. But Pierre Gasly, my goodness, best thing that he did, going back into Louis' discussion earlier about leaving the Red Bull family. The best thing that Gasly did was leave the Red Bull family, and now he has stepped into Alpine. Like I mentioned earlier, he's kind of taken this team that was Ocon's for years and made it his own, and next year he's going to have a rookie driver alongside him, so it automatically makes him team leader. And the results as well have been inspiring. Yes, it's been patchy. Yes, the car's been horrible, but save the retirement in Vegas, you had the podium in Sao Paulo. He also scored points in the sprint race as well that day. But then 2 top 7 finishes in the last 2 races as well, fifth in Qatar, seventh in Abu Dhabi. Inspiring stuff for a team that, has been mired to the back of the field, has been basically the laughing stock, you could say, of Formula One with some of the decisions that they've made and the merry-go-round of team management as well. And still I still can't get over the driver debacle that they had a couple of years ago where they lost two of their top drivers as a result of that. So, and Gasly wasn't even their top choice at that point to sign. They lost Alonso, they lost Piastri, and then they apparently tried going after someone else like a Carlos Sainz. Even next year, or even this year, they tried going after a Carlos Sainz and a Franco Colapinto and whatnot. But Gasly's really proven that he is solid. He can do it in a midfield team. He can take them forward. So I think, what would have been absolutely disaster has been prevented, and I reckon it's off the back of Gasly's performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact as well, as you mentioned, they went from P9 in the championship to P6 in the space of a race weekend and somehow managed to hold on to that. And that, I believe, is down to Pierre Gasly because Haas were there and there or thereabouts for about the whole season. And then Alpine have just come in and swooped it with 4 races to go. And that's just about being in the right place at the right time. But Pierre Gasly is the reason as to why they stayed above Haas, despite I believe we described Alpine's performance at Las Vegas as embarrassing, but they recovered it for the last few races at the very least, even if there were some organizational decisions that we disagreed with. But speaking of Haas, then Louis, we're going to lump Behrman in with this because he did do 2 races for the team, despite obviously making his debut for Ferrari. Both Haas drivers, Ollie Behrman and Nico Hulkenberg, getting Bs from Grid Talk. Behrman P18 in the championship with 7 points from 3 races. Hulkenberg P11 with 41 points. 2 P6s in Austria and Silverstone. We've seen, I think, the best of Nico Hulkenberg this season. And we've seen a very promising start to his F1 career from Ollie Behrman, I believe.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, Behrman scored he got 2 point finishes out of the 3 races that he did, and I think in Sao Paulo he was generally quite unlucky. He was having quite a good race, and I think it was definitely unlucky that he didn't score points on in that race with the whole red flag. I think it just kind of really screwed him, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, I mean it's promising. It's definitely looking good for Ollie Behrman. I think he's coming into a team that I think quite a stable Haas team, which I think is the first time I think we've really been able to say that. It's usually been quite a volatile team under Gunther Steiner. Something's always lurking and something's always about to go wrong. Even when it's looking good, you know that something's going to come crashing down. But Ayo Komatsu this year he's really stabilized the team. There just seems to be this nice kind of energy with the team, and I think that's particularly where Nico Hulkenberg has absolutely thrived this year, and I think he's more than deserved that B grade. He has been incredibly consistent. He is often getting that car up there in qualifying, getting it into Q3, getting the point finishes that they need. And even when he's not, you look at his results and it's like when he's not scoring points, he's finished P11 in one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 races this year. He's finished P11. So he's always kind of been there or there about the points. And yeah, I think unfortunately his efforts didn't quite get to pay off because of Alpine's resurgence that we just spoke about. But no, Hulkenberg has been an incredibly solid driver this year, and I look forward to seeing what he can do with Audi. I mean, next year's not going to be great. Unfortunately, he's going to have to take a bit of a bullet next year, but I still expect that level of consistency from him. I think we all know Hulkenberg is a very reliable driver these days. He's kind of what Checo was, like kind of like 4 or 5 years ago. He's kind of that reliable. He'll go out each weekend, he'll do his best, and that's what he's done this year, and it's yielded quite a lot of points for a Haas team that has always been a bit for the last few years. And I genuinely look forward to see what he can do. And Behrman, next year, him and Ocon, I think could be a really good partnership. It's two drivers who have a lot of talent, a lot of speed. And it'd be interesting to see how they get along. I'm actually really not sure how they're going to get along as teammates. I think it could bang heads sometimes, but I think they're two drivers that will definitely push each other. And I think Behrman, I think my personal opinion on Behrman is that he is in Haas until Lewis decides after a couple of years that he's probably done with Formula One and he's straight in that Ferrari seat.
Yeah, and I think as well in that regard between like how next season's Haas teammates will perform, I feel like that is where Ayuka Matsu will really prove his mettle in Formula One. As you say, he's done a great job with Haas this season. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what he does with them next season. Jawad, then on to the other Mercedes driver, George Russell, P6 in the championship, 245 points, two P1s, could have been three if not for an underweight car in Belgium. But, how George Russell, he's now going to be Mercedes, poster boy, the lead driver in that team. And, the last time he was a lead driver, it was at Williams, where he developed his, Mr. Saturday persona and was constantly chasing down that first point. Does the performance of George Russell this season like fill you with confidence that he can lead Mercedes back to the front in 2025 or further?
To be honest, I still need convincing that he is everything that he says he is, and he does talk himself up a lot, which is one, thing I've noticed definitely, and it can rub people the wrong way too. I do want to start by saying I feel like again Russell has had the unfortunate or cop the raw end of reliability when it comes to Mercedes this year, and DNFs in general. When you compare that to Lewis's results, even though he has beaten Lewis in the championship by 22 points, I think it was. But yeah, getting out on the last lap in Australia, he crashed even though there was no contact with Alonso, the retirement in Silverstone as well, and then of course getting disqualified in Belgium. But then you've got races like Vegas and Belgium up until the disqualification that he showed that he is commanding. He can command a race. He can lead from the front and everything, but it's about that pressure. And I'll talk about that when I get to Lando a bit later. And it's like, you're not a leader or you're not in that position, or you can't really prove that you are all that until you can prove that you can cope under the pressure. And George hasn't been in that situation where he's fighting for a world championship. So for him to come out after, I think it was Vegas, saying that, he would have done a better job if he was fighting Max for the championship, I thought that was a total load of whatever. But then also don't go picking a fight with Max without having the runs on the board yourself, which George doesn't do. He's got a few wins and he's proved here and there that he is all that he's promised, but we haven't seen it fulfilled yet. And I think he's getting a bit too eager, but I want to be proven wrong. I want him to come out next year as a spearhead for Mercedes, the poster boy, leading that team back to the front, because he has been their little boy or their poster boy that they've tried to groom up and be all that, be Mr. Professional, Dick Dastardly, whatever you want to say. So, he's still performed this year deserving of an A. He's been one of the top drivers, and yeah, particularly towards the end of the season where we did see a bit more form in that Mercedes car on his side of the garage, that he got podiums. He got the podium in Texas and in Vegas. Well, he got the win in Vegas, but yeah, towards the end of the year, he did really well. So I'm reading the results wrong, and he didn't get any podiums at the end of the year. It was in Baku he got his last podium before the win. But yeah, he had pole again in Qatar as well. So, the performance is there. We just need to see consistency, but also when the blowtorch is applied as well, see how he fares with that because, yeah, like we're seeing with other drivers this year, it can be a bit difficult, but it's a real baptism by fire.
Yeah, it certainly will be. And replacing, Lewis Hamilton, as I said, as like the lead driver of the team, the more mature driver in the team, let's say, there's a lot of pressure there. And, I feel like, as you say, he's showing signs, but I don't think he's quite there yet. But Louis, a driver who has had, not necessarily the season that he had last season where, it was podiums all the way up until about halfway through the season. Fernando Alonso, he's finished P9 in the championship and has somehow managed to scrape together 70 points in that Aston Martin, which, was not in the position that it was last season. But I'm no Fernando Alonso fan. I think that's very well documented. But I think this has been one of Fernando's stronger seasons in terms of, delivering when the car just isn't there. Do you agree? What do you think of Fernando's season in 2024?
I mean, the one word I think is consistency. Kind of like Nico Hulkenberg, but taken with a bit better car. Essentially, I think in terms of seasons, I would rank. I think it's fair to give both Nico Hulkenberg and Fernando Alonso the same grade because I think they've kind of just done the same job, but at different levels, if you get what I mean. So Fernando has been ultimately consistent. He has been consistently quick. He's been consistently scoring points, and he has just gone through the season scoring points nicely and absolutely wiped the floor with Lance Stroll once again. He's almost got three times the amount of points of Lance Stroll. And Mike Crack say they're the same. They're not. They're not. He's having to say that because he's got a Lawrence Stroll with a big gun to his head when he's making comments like that. But Fernando, he's getting on, but his age just doesn't seem to show. I think that's sometimes when we see drivers getting a bit older, their consistency goes, they kind of up and down. We saw that with Kimi, we kind of saw that with Vettel as well. Just have these sort of waves. But Fernando's really, really kept it. And I think it's a testament to just how much he loves his sport and just how good he is in general. Whether you like him or not, yeah, he's still doing exactly the job that Aston Martin need him to do, even with a much more inferior car this year than they had last year. Yeah, I think he probably did as well as he can get. He was never really that Aston Martin was never really gonna be up there with the top four teams. So finishing P9, literally the best of the rest, was as fair a position as he could probably get this year. And yeah, there's not really much else to say about Fernando. I mean, he's going to be here next year. Um, he's going to have a new car to drive. I think he's probably going to be incredibly excited about that. And he is still very much the leader in that team. He's the only one really doing anything in that team. But yeah, we'll see how much longer he goes on for. It would not surprise me to get to 2030 and he's still here.
Yeah, I feel like Fernando Alonso is probably going to retire in like 2076 or something like that, and he'll still be in Aston Martin or, some other, team that's shown up later down the line. Um, but yeah, like he just keeps going, and maybe there'll be another few like hiatuses in between, as we saw after the McLaren Honda stint. Maybe after a few years of Aston Martin Honda, it might happen, but. Yeah, a solidly consistent season despite an inconsistent and underperforming car. And the last of our B grades then, Howard, we're going to give to Carlos Sainz, a driver who before the season even started knew he wasn't going to be staying with the team past this season. Almost nothing to prove, but everything to gain. He's finished P5 in the championship, 290 points, only two behind Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. He's got two wins, one in Australia where Max Verstappen DNF'd, one in Mexico. Um, is it a B season for Carlos Sainz? And was there anything that he could have done to just get into an A?
Oh, the smooth operator. Look, to be honest, I think the result at the end of the season kind of prove to anyone who still felt upset over him being let go by Ferrari, that Ferrari have kind of kept the better driver. And to me, this was one of Charles Leclerc's best seasons in F1. It's kind of flown under the radar when you look at everything else that was going on. But, Sainz, he is there. He's quick. He's intelligent technically and everything, but still lacks that raw talent, that raw speed that would put, him in that same category as your Leclerc, Verstappen, Hamilton, Norris in that respect. So, but still, I think it was a fantastic season for Carlos Sainz, particularly, as you said, rebounding from the news of losing his seat pre-season as well. It was interesting. I was revisiting some predictions that I did prior to the start of the season for the Raw, and I went out and said before we even turned a wheel for the championship that, yeah, so for my Australian Grand Prix win, I'm predicting Carlos Sainz. And then he got appendicitis. He had to get the appendix removed and didn't race at the second race. And I'm like, well, there goes that prediction. But then he turns up in Melbourne, showing off his scar and everything. And, I've got some pretty interesting photos from that weekend as well of him. And he wins the race. Yes, Max Verstappen did retire. He had a rare mechanical failure in the Red Bull, but he went out there and did a smooth operation. And then Mexico, I think, was the icing on the cake for that, to go from pole, leading and winning that one. It was really good for him. And I'm glad that he got another win under his belt before he bowed out for Ferrari. The respect from the team to him has been next to nothing. We've seen other drivers when they've left Ferrari not get the treatment that Sainz has. He got to do some laps at Fiorano with his dad in another Ferrari F1 car, which was really good to see. I think they've gifted him one of their road going supercars as well, with smooth operator engraved on the bonnet or something like that. So it shows you the love and the respect there. And if it wasn't Lewis Hamilton, if it was any other driver that came onto the market, I still think, Ferrari have one of the best balanced lineups with Sainz and Leclerc together. So I'm just kind of gutted that, because of their performances being what they were this season, that they couldn't win the Constructors' Championship. And that's me as a McLaren fan saying that, because they definitely were quite consistent. But again, just lacking in those small areas. And, Sainz, if he was a bit further up the grid, for example, in certain races, it would have been a lot better. But again, he kind of lacks that sort of edge in qualifying that Leclerc and the others have.
Yeah, absolutely. A season to finish, for Carlos Sainz, I think, absolutely. And moving on then to his teammate who starts off our A grades, Louis Charles Leclerc. He's finished P3 in the championship. There was a chance, that he was still going to be in the running for a P2 almost. I think it was more likely that Leclerc would get P2 than it was that Lando Norris would get P1 at some points. But 3 wins, his home Grand Prix in Monaco, Ferrari's home Grand Prix in Monza, and of course COTA, where I believe he was disqualified from last season. It's been a good season for Charles Leclerc, and as Jawad said, proved why Ferrari have made the right decision in terms of which of their two drivers to stick with. And I feel like, granted, it was never going to be Leclerc that they dropped, but at the same time, like, absolutely an A grade season for Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Jared when he said that it's possibly been Leclerc's best season in Formula One. I would definitely agree. He has really come out flying this year. He was always this kind of dark underdog for this whole year, and then it kind of slowly emerged to him. It's like, oh, Charles. We're talking about Max and Lando, but Charles is still like right there. He's not really gone anywhere. And yeah, he's had some absolutely momentous wins this year. He winning in his home race in Monaco, winning Ferrari's home race in Monza. I mean, just to tick those both in the same season must be one of the most special things for Charles. And then obviously getting his third win in Austin was huge for his potential title hopes as well. I think is when people really started to take Charles as a title contender incredibly seriously. So yeah, I think Charles has definitely been great this season. I think definitely worthy of an A grade. Yeah, I don't think it was ever a choice in Ferrari who was going to go when Hamilton came along. Charles Leclerc is Ferrari. He is what Lando is to McLaren. He is what Lewis was to Mercedes for a while. He is their driver, and it's nice to finally see a bit more of a happy Charles. We've not seen a very happy Charles for the last couple of years. It's been a very testing and trying time for him at Ferrari for the last few years, as Ferrari have kind of petered and just really gone off the walls. But I think it's all credit to Fred Vasseur. He has come in and he's done a marvelous job with that team. And he had two drivers this year who are absolutely on it, and Charles just being a bit more on it than Carlos, but a great season.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, brilliant, all the superlatives, that you can possibly give. And yeah, a great way to, you know, set themselves up for hopefully a good season next season for Ferrari. Fred Vasseur, Charles Leclerc, and Lewis Hamilton. What a trio. But Jawad, let's talk about our constructors' champions then. Both McLarens deserving of an A grade. Lando Norris, 4 wins, Oscar Piastri, 2. You could maybe say that there should be more wins on either side, um, like for many, many contexts. But ultimately, McLaren have shown this season that they've still got it, despite waiting 26 years, I think it was, for a Constructors' Championship. And yeah, I think has probably put them in a very good stead, as I was just saying about Ferrari, for even to continue that momentum to next season. But what did you make of the McLarens this season?
Look, I think overall, and I said earlier, as a McLaren fan, it's difficult not to be, overjoyed with the success. It's the first Constructors' Championship that they've had in the 21st century, the first of any championship that we've had since 2008 as well. And when you wind the clock back, a few years ago, the 2015, the Honda years, they were so dark and dreary. You never thought that, these days would come where you're regularly winning Grand Prix. You've got the fastest car on the grid and everything. You've got two star drivers who, achieved both their best personal best seasons in F1 as well. 4 wins to Lando, as you said, 2 for Oscar, their first wins in F1 as well coming this season. So, when you look at that, it's like all things are rosy. But I think, where, say, we'll start with Oscar first, where Oscar can improve. And for me, I don't think it was quite a perfect day for him this year. When you look at the qualifying head-to-heads, he was comprehensively beaten by Norris. I think 21-3 was the tune, and then also a little bit of inconsistency, particularly towards the end of the season, where I think he only scored the one podium. Yeah, and that was at the Qatar Grand Prix since his podium in Singapore. So forget that, he's still in his second season in F1, and he is going to make hopefully some gains into next year. But, there's still things that he needs to address and whatnot. He's definitely shown that he's got the ruthless intent in him, that he's not here to make friends with his teammate when it matters on track, as we saw at certain flashpoints within the season between the two of them. For Lando, best season yet, the fact that he got his first win under the belt, the monkeys off the back, but then also just the way he's carried that team with him the last few years and has really put them in this position to fight for the championship. I'm going to stick with what I've been saying all year that unfortunately the Drivers' Championship was not on this year. And I think what I was saying in relation to George earlier as well is that unfortunately Lando kind of buckled to the pressure, I guess, of what the media and fans have been perpetuating all year about a championship. It kind of exposed him to not be ready to take on the mental load of fighting someone like Max Verstappen. And, Max, we can say all we want about him and his conduct, his driving standards and everything, but, he, in that same Michael Schumacher-esque mold and the Ayrton Senna mold, being ruthless, there's a reason why people fear him, kind of thing. And I think, you've got to get over that fear, and there's a little bit of work that they can do over the off season. And it's not that I'm just making this up. Lando acknowledged this after the race in Abu Dhabi, that they're going to walk away into the winter, and these are things that they're going to work on coming into next year. So if anyone wants to come at me for that, go back and watch the post race interview. And it's good to hear that they acknowledge, and Lando acknowledges that that's something that they need to work on. And I think they can grow from it. And we're going to see him come out next year and be in the hunt from race one. And that was a thing that also hurt McLaren this year too, which, as a team, they've had their struggles operationally and also hitting the start of the season in that strong position. I think it wasn't, they had to wait till Miami to get some upgrades again that ultimately put them into race winning contention. They need to rock up in the first race and be that. So, you look at those 5 races where Max won 4 of them. That is essentially, I guess, the difference between McLaren being there and Lando being there than Max being there. So, I think it's been a stellar season for them. I think they can only just continue to get better and better. It's going to be great seeing 2 drivers on the team being at that high standard too. And it's really mature of Lando to acknowledge that, yeah, these are things that they need to work on going into next season. I think he has the capability to be world champion. So does his teammate. Who's going to do it first? Who knows? I think that's where the entertainment's going to be at. And hopefully we'll have the Ferraris and the Verstappens in the hunt, Mercedes if they get their act together. But yeah, I think it's been a landmark season for them. Well done. And yeah, I'm looking forward to next year already.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, there's still room for improvement, and that's why they've got an A as opposed to the A star that we're going to give our only A star grade, Louis, to Max Verstappen, our 4-time F1 world champion. There was talk in our season review as to whether this was his best championship win. Not where I would say, but it has been, just it was the Max Verstappen show at the start of this season. We've got 9 wins in total. He's the only driver in the 400 points. It was Max Verstappen's championship to lose, and he did not lose it, even with a Red Bull that, lost that head start that it had, but it was the start of the season that won him this championship.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, he won 7 of the first 10 races of the season. It looked, and honestly, I think we all started to worry. It was like, oh, last year was not a fun year to watch Formula One when Max Verstappen is literally winning nearly every race. And I did kind of feel like that was going to happen again. But as we saw, Red Bull kind of dropped the ball a bit and allowed McLaren and Ferrari and Mercedes all to kind of sneak up and start challenging. But to kind of counter your point, I don't think Max won the championship in the first half of the season. I think he won it in the second half of the season because that was where the pressure was. That was when McLaren, that was when Ferrari, that was when Mercedes were faster. And he had to be as competitive. He had his gap. He'd done what he could. Won the race. He like won in Bahrain by like 20 something seconds. Like the Red Bull was quick. He did what he needed to do, but then the hard work came later, and he had to drag and fight for every point because he knew every point later on in the season would matter because he had to take advantage every time Lando Norris or every time McLaren just had a weird thing. He had to be there to capitalize. Anytime Ferrari or Mercedes were not quite challenging McLaren that weekend, he had to be there. He had to get the points. We see a lot of these sort of fifth places, fourth places, sixth, sort of anywhere between fourth and sixth in a fourth best car at times when he should be finishing, P8, P7. And he was grinding these points. There's such a huge gap between his win in Spain and then finally winning a race again in Sao Paulo. But I think it was that time between Spain and Sao Paulo that was when he won the world championship for me. It was that grind. It was that need, that relentless drive to score every single point because he knew that it would pay off later in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I meant to tee that up as a did he win it in the first half of the season? But you ran with it and you made me look like an idiot, which is exactly what Grid Talk's here for. But no salt. Jawad, just another point then on Max Verstappen, of course. Those 9 wins. And as Louis pointed out, the gap between Spain and Brazil, like that's where he's shown that maturity, I think, that we've not seen from Max in like his earlier like career, of like picking up those points, picking up the win, not the wins, the podiums where he could and things like that. But do you think there was a point where he was worried that he wouldn't win that season?
Um, yeah, I guess when you look, I think kind of the Silverstone onwards, that sort of time of the year where the gap had, I think the shortest the gap was at whatever point in the season was around 40 points, which, still is more than a race win's worth. And, you'd have to win a sprint and a race win in a weekend to overturn that. So maybe then, when we did see him kind of lose his cool a little bit in Hungary, Hungary was the race that the radio kind of went on fire through that weekend. And then, his antics in Mexico as well were very questionable. But then there was that sort of underlying tactician Schumacher-esque, oh, well, I don't care if I get a penalty, but Lando's going to lose points as a result of taking him off here, so I'm going to do it kind of thing. That you kind of sit there just shaking your head and like what's going on here? So I feel like it obviously got under his skin enough to rattle him kind of around Hungary time. But then he kind of let he let his talent and his performance, kind of make up for it in the way that he did. And you look at the wins in Brazil, that weekend is why Verstappen is known. It's where he announced himself back in 2016. And I think he's kind of cemented his legacy with the drive there, and then also backing it up in Qatar again. Who would have thought? We all went to Qatar thinking, oh, it's a McLaren track. They'll blitz it, and what you get is George Russell on pole and Max Verstappen winning the Grand Prix. So, and yeah, I think Imola as well was another one where, Lando really pressured him at the end of the race, but he withstood that. If he wasn't who he was, a four-time world champ, or at the time a three-time world champion, I think he would have buckled under the pressure. But he's ruthless, he's relentless, and that's what I guess, you kind of need as a world champion. To that you've got to have that mentality, and all the greats, your Hamiltons, your Sennas, your Schumachers have all been like that when they've been in that position. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, it certainly does. Yeah, so that's our driver grades for the 23 drivers. Obviously, Jack Doohan did take part in one final race, but we didn't think it was fair enough to give him a season grade based on that one performance. But I think given it was a P15, it wouldn't have been very good. But in terms of the actual season, then, Louis, let's start with you. Who was your driver of the season?
That's a hard question. I mean, the easy cop-out answer would be Max Verstappen, and then my biased opinion would be Lando Norris. But I don't think it would be right to award either of those drivers with a driver of the season because they've kind of been a bit over all over the place this year. Just the fact that they're in very competitive cars, very quick cars, means that their inconsistencies can be kind of overlooked at times. Honestly, I think I'm kind of between two drivers. One is Nico Hulkenberg, and the other is Charles Leclerc. And honestly, I think my choice is going to go to Charles Leclerc, and I'm so sorry, Jawad. I'm really sorry, but Charles
Yeah.
Leclerc is.
It did very much look like you'd stolen exactly what Jawad was going to say. So I'll hand it over to you, Jawad. Is it Charles Leclerc by any chance?
Look, it was. I didn't think we would get stuck, particularly if we're not going to go down the obvious path here between our McLaren drivers and Verstappen. And yeah, to me, the two names that really stood out were Nico Hulkenberg and Charles Leclerc. Like I said earlier, this is probably Leclerc's best season in F1, but also such an underrated season when you look at what was going on ahead of him most of the time. And like Louis detailed earlier, Monaco Grand Prix victory, on home soil, Monza win, Ferrari's home soil. It's the second time he's won in Monza, this time actually with a legal car, if we want to go down that path in 2019. And then also picking up a dominant win in Texas as well. I was like, I remember we were in the live chat at the time for the race, and I was like, yeah, Leclerc from fourth is going to send it into the first corner. What does he do? Sends it into the first corner, takes the lead, and doesn't look back from there. So, like they weren't talked up as being title hopefuls or any kind of hopefuls this season. And I think that has been good with Ferrari and with Leclerc, like Louis said earlier as well. Fred Vasseur, what he's done with the team and his guidance has been really influential. And, I don't want to get my hopes up about them breaking their title drought next year, but, it's all very positive signs. And I think, Leclerc is starting to become that complete package as well, not just that, one hot lap driver that he's kind of spent most of his career as so far, but he's showing that maturity in the race. So yeah, I would say that, he would definitely be one of my top drivers of the season.
Yeah, my driver of the season is Sergio Perez. No, it's not. Great dramatic effect there, Louis. Yeah, I think I have to also agree that Charles Leclerc has been the standout driver of the season ultimately, like over the entire course of the season. Just not being in the picture to, picking up points, picking up enough to put themselves back in the picture later on in the season. Like that's the mark of a driver that's thinking about the long haul rather than just the immediate, or even the team thinking about the long haul, really. It's not won in the first race of the season, but it's also not lost in the first race of the season. Um, but Jawad, is there anything you want to take this opportunity to plug right now as we're wrapping things up?
Um, I wrote an article for F1 Chronicle the other day about Red Bull and their habit of making mistakes when it comes to picking drivers. So you could probably go check that out if you want to have a bit of a laugh of me ripping into Red Bull again. But yeah, other than that, not really at the moment. Not for this season.
Not for this season. Louis, how about yourself? Anything you want to plug?
Not personally, but of course, please make sure to follow Grid Talk on all of our socials. That is at Grid Talk UK, and also support us on Patreon, which I'm sure Rubes will give more details about.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing as well that I'm going to plug is Grid Talk being in the Sports Podcast Awards for the Best Motorsport Podcast of 2024. There'll be a link in the description if you want to take literally 2 minutes to go and vote for us. We're up against some very stiff competition, but, I'm sure our dedicated listeners will go and, show their support for Grid Talk. Hashtag vote Grid Talk if hashtags are still a thing, I say as a social media person that works in social. If you do want to follow me on anything else, I am at Ruby Price on Facebook, not Facebook, on Instagram and Threads. But yeah, Grid Talk itself is available on YouTube, where most of our race episodes are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to Patreon for exclusive content? And also make sure you subscribe to be the first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye.